I wonder how many of you have had the experience of coming back home after a trip and finding that things are not the way they were when you left. In this case, friends of mine were gone for a few days and came back to their home to find a major roof leak had occurred during a thunderstorm. There was a lot of sheetrock damage around the window. The water ran down onto a built-in desk in the study and soaked into the top so that the wood expanded. As it expanded, it pushed the backsplash trim up out of its normal position and left a permanent hump in the desk. The hump was not so significant, however, that the top had to be replaced. The other big issue is the sheetrock repair. It always appears to be a huge undertaking to repair something like this, probably because it looks so bad. But in reality, it's not that difficult. It's just a little tedious, and the process unfolds in multiple steps. So in this video, I'll show you how I dealt with the sheetrock repair as well as the repair of the desktop and backsplash. Whenever I go into a home and see a sheetrock repair that looks bad, the first mistake made looks like someone tried to complete the repair in one step. They've taken drywall mud and put a layer on the patch and then tried to build texture back on top of that area in the same step. In reality, joint compound has its own characteristics for the way that it works. And once you understand that, it's much easier to get good finish results. So we'll touch on that later in the video.
Once water has gotten behind the paint, that's destroyed the integrity of the mud coating on top of the sheetrock and the paint. Like in this case, we have real faint bubbles here, but if you tap on them with your fingernail, you'll hear kind of a hollowness, which means that the paint's turned loose from the texture behind. And so I'm gonna have to scrape off the majority of this really to make sure we get a good bond.
The main objective here is to get any loose material on the wall off the wall. I could have torn the sheetrock completely off of these areas instead of scraping them down as I am. The results after the repair are going to be the same regardless of which direction I'd gone. So the decision to scrape it down is a preference simply on my part for this particular job, and I try to gauge which method is best use of my time. As long as I scrape it down to the point that all water damaged areas are gone, I'm good to come back with new joint compound and begin building back the surface.
Alright, so to get going building this back, I retaped the corner joint there with sheetrock tape. And now I'm just going to add a thin coat on top of the existing mud and just start to build this back out.
One good thing to realize about the blade I'm using to apply joint compound is that it has a bow to it. That's right, when you look down the length of it, you should be able to see that the edge bows slightly in one direction or the other. That comes in handy when you apply the mud to the wall if you always make sure that the bow is against the wall. If you have it flipped over the other direction, you'll see that the corners of the blade will tend to dig into the mud, whereas with the bow against the wall, the corners will feather the mud as you apply it, which makes it easier to put on a smooth coat without leaving a lot of lines. After getting an initial coat of mud on, wait until the next day before doing anything further. Once the first coat is dried, each next coat is easier to apply and work because the base coat of mud dries out each new coat in a very consistent way. You can sand lightly between coats, but the more experience you get, the less sanding you'll find that you do. I will typically only sand some areas just before painting in order to remove any lines left over from the application process. Sanding creates so much dust that you're better off keeping it to a minimum. I'm only going to need one more coat before I'm ready for paint. In this case, because all the walls in the home have a hand-plastered look to them, I'm going to use what's called a Venetian plaster trowel to apply the final coat. The same job could be done with the blade I used before, but I like using the small trowel for finishes like this. It's just a matter of personal preference. Again, I'm trying to apply a thin and consistent coat. The difference here from the first coat is that now, if I wait just a couple of minutes after I put on this second skim coat, I can come back over it with my trowel and get a pretty much perfectly smooth finish on the wall that will need no sanding. It's all a matter of timing. It doesn't take much experimentation to figure out when each area is ready for a final troweling. My final step before painting is to run a bead of flexible painter's caulk into the corner between the window frame and the sheetrock. This will help to keep cracks from developing in this area over time. There's nothing magical about applying paint. I just cut in against the window frame and in the corner with a brush and then come back with a roller. I applied 2 coats in this case, and that was perfect for getting the new work to blend in with the original paint. I put the backsplash back in place now, and we have an issue that I have to deal with here. The water that leaked, that did all the sheetrock damage, also leaked on the countertop, which is an MDF core with an alder veneer on top of it. And that core swelled as the water stayed on it for a little bit, and so we have a few humps, just a little distortion of the top again. It's not bad enough that it needs to be replaced. But it's bad enough that the backsplash has to be addressed because we have now about a 3/16 inch gap at this end of the backsplash. It's out of level, and so need to correct that. So what I've done is taken my carpenter's pencil and sharpened it real sharp, and I'm going to use the thickness of it, which is just about right to match the thickness of what damage was done. I'm going to scribe a line now on this backsplash piece, take it back to the shop, and then take off this material underneath the line until I have erased the line, and that should then allow us to bring this back, set it on the countertop, and it be a tight fit against the top itself. So we'll give that a try and see how that works. I'm pretty happy with the results, so I added silicone caulk to the back of the splashes. Then I'm using the paint cans to hold them in place while the silicone sets up. Back in business. I hope you found some tips that can help you if you run into similar water damage issues. Thanks for checking out Daub's Workshop, and I hope you'll stop by every week or so to see what else we're up to. There's always something going on.